It's the 4th of October and it's time for the fourth film in my 31 Horrors of Mike. This time we're going back to 1942 to a film which many regard as one of the most important horror films ever made. It's the film Cat People. It was directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton. On one hand, you have some people who claim that it's an absolute masterpiece of the genre, while you have other people like John Carpenter who think it's very overrated. So Cat People is about a Serbian immigrant who comes to Manhattan who falls in love with an American marine engineer named Oliver. The two of them fall in love, everything seems fine. But she tells of a story of how people from her country seem to have been, not everyone from the country, but people from where her family are descended from, were supposedly cursed in such a way that when they become passionate, they turn into this bloodthirsty cat-like creature which will then go on the rampage and kill people. And throughout the film she becomes obsessed by this, and she believes that she is descended from these people, and she worries that this will happen to her. At the same time, Oliver also becomes closer to his friend Alice, and there's a question about whether they'll get together, which might enrage Irina, and perhaps she will turn into a cat person. You don't really know. That's the whole sort of point of it. Now, it's a film which, for the time especially, I think it is really quite impressive. I don't necessarily think it holds up as well as many of the sort of classic horror films of the sort of 30s and 40s. And I think it's similar to when you look at Dracula, the Universal film, because they were experimenting with sound and they were experimenting with certain sort of shots, especially with the way Dracula's disposed of in that film. There's certain things that eventually became conventions of the genre that you're just used to seeing. And because of that, when you look back to that film, certain things don't quite add up. They don't really sort of work in the same way that they probably did work then. And I think Cat People is a bit like that. Now, there are a lot of people who will defend this film to the grave. A lot of people that effectively are fanboys of the movie. If you really love this film, that's absolutely fine. I really like it. I think it's very, very good. I think it's very impressive. I think the biggest problem, and this is something that John Carpenter said on Mark Gatiss's TV series History of Horror, he said that, bullshit, show the monster. And Jacques Tourneur and Val Lewton didn't really show the creature much throughout the film. You're not really sure if it's there, you're not really sure what's going on. And so it's more psychological in a lot of ways. But in saying that, I still think the film is creepy, and there's a lot of tension in certain scenes. And there's a very, very famous scene which really gave birth to the jump out scare, which is far too overused in horror cinema these days. But they call it the Lewton bus, which, and I'm not exactly sure why it's named after Val Lewton when he was the producer rather than Jacques Tourneur, the director. And it's really you'll see so many times in horror films especially where there's a sort of rise of tension. It'll get to a crescendo and then the tension is broken by something startling happening, and that's what happens here, and it happens with a bus hit, hence why it's called Lewton's bus. So really, like, that's one of the most important techniques that it probably gave to the horror genre. But I think it affected a lot of directors in the future to really consider doing things on a psychological level, because if you look at a lot of the horror films from that time and even afterwards for a while, most of them were very overt. It was like you knew you were dealing with a monster, you knew you were dealing with some sort of creature, you knew right away. But in this film, it's more ambiguous. I do have problems with it. When they do show you certain things, I think... See, it's easy for me to say I think it could have been done better, but again, like I say, they were breaking new ground with this film. But it's certainly one which I don't think everybody will love this film. I think some people will. I really enjoy it. But I love films from the 1930s and 40s. I think it's really interesting to watch something that's sort of breaking new ground at the time and helping to develop the horror genre into what it became. I think one of the interesting things about the film is that in the 1940s was and 30s as well were really characterised by very, very fast dialogue, and that doesn't really happen in Cat People. The delivery of the lines by the actors is very deliberate. It's very slow. It's spacious. There are a lot of gaps, a lot of pauses, and I think that adds to the whole sense within the film that there's this sort of sense of impending dread, of impending doom, that something terrible is going to happen, and I think that's very effective. I'm not convinced all of the performances are amazing in it, but like I say, it sounds like I'm crucifying the film. Why would I put it on the list? I do really like it. I think it's a really important film. I do really enjoy it. I just don't think it's amazingly great. I think maybe part of the problem is that there are some films that were probably great at the time but haven't aged as well, and normally that's down to not things like special effects, because I can get past that quite easily. It's normally down to just something not being, maybe with the editing, or something's just not quite right. They don't have it down. They don't have the tone down, the pacing of things down, in the way that they do later on in cinema. But then you've got great films of the era that do seem to have that down. So I don't really know, but it's certainly a film that I would recommend. It's quite a tragic tale. It really is, and I think it also explores, like, Jacques Tourneur was born in Paris, and he came over to America when he was a boy. Val Lewton was a Russian immigrant, and the film does explore, I think, the relation of a foreigner coming to another land and not being accepted and wanting so badly to be accepted. And in some cases it's actually uncomfortable to watch, because I think in one way you could interpret the film in some ways almost as being sort of xenophobic. I certainly got that while watching it. I certainly got that I felt that there was a little bit of kind of, the scary foreigner with witchcraft type of thing going on. But at the same time, I think the film's actually more subversive than that. I think it's actually, when you really think about it, it's kind of the story of a woman who wants to be loved, and that's all. She just wants to be accepted. And the Americans in the film actually come across as kind of assholes in certain places. And that's not to say that Americans are, of course they're not, but I think that it's inferred in the film that generally sometimes, and not just in America but in Britain, wherever, that we perhaps don't accept outsiders the way we should, that we become wary of them just because there's cultural differences, and I think that's going on in the film. So it's quite clever in that way, and I would absolutely recommend watching it. If you're not a fan of sort of maybe 30s, 40s cinema or 30s, 40s horror cinema, then I don't know if it's a great one to introduce yourself to. But if you do like things that are more psychological, if you do like things that are maybe a little bit slower paced, then it is definitely for you. Also, it's a short film as well. It's like an hour and 12 minutes long or something like that. So it's not, doesn't take up a lot of your time to watch what is regarded as one of the classic horror films, if not one of the best, certainly one of the most important. So go and check that out. That's 1942's Cat People. There was a sequel, Curse of the Cat People, I think it was called, which doesn't really have anything to do with this film. It's kind of a little bit weird. And there's another film called The Leopard Man, which some people connect to this movie because I think it was directed by Jacques Tourneur as well and made by Val Lewton. Jacques Tourneur actually made Night of the Demon and I Walk with the Zombies, and what else did he make? He made Comedy of Terrors, which is a great little American International picture with Vincent Price and Boris Karloff and Peter Lorre and Basil Rathbone. Great little film. But anyway, so I would definitely recommend going and watching Cat People if you haven't seen it already. And I'd like to know what your interpretations of it are, because the sort of xenophobic strain that I was talking about within it, there's a good little bit of debate there, and I would be interested to see how people see that. And that's all I really wanted to say. I'll be back tomorrow with another film, and as always, keep the suggestions coming, and I'm really loving reading all your comments, so I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now. This bloodthirsty cat-like creature which will then go on the rampage and kill people. And throughout the film she becomes obsessed by this, and she believes that she is descended. It's the 4th of October and it's time for the 4th film in my 31 Horrors of Mike. This time we're going back to 1942 to a film which many regard as one of the most important horror films ever made. It's the film country seemed to have been, not everyone from the country, but people from where her family are descended from, were supposedly cursed in such a way that when they become passionate, they turn into cat people. It was directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton. On one hand, you have some people who claim that it's an absolute masterpiece of the genre, while you have other people like John Carpenter who think it's very overrated. So Cat People is about a Serbian immigrant who comes to Manhattan, who falls in love with an American marine engineer named Oliver. The two of them fall in love, everything seems fine. But she tells of a story of how people from her country